My wife sent me to my mother-in-law's country house to help install a greenhouse. She is a lonely woman with no one to help her, and we have a good relationship, so I agreed without hesitation. The weather that day was very hot, so on the way, I got a cold beer from the store to help my wife's mother. I hoped I could get everything done by the evening and be able to get home without too much delay. When I arrived at the cottage, my mother-in-law greeted me with open arms and a warm smile. "Ethan, it's so good to see you," Margaret said, stepping out onto the balcony. Her face lit up as soon as she saw me. I rushed as fast as I could. "Mom," I reply, smiling back at her, feeling a mixture of exhaustion from the heat and relief that I had finally made it. Margaret stood there in a light cotton robe that moved playfully in the breeze, revealing enough that it was hard not to notice. "Let me show you what needs to be done," she continued, her voice full of enthusiasm. She led me to the area where the future greenhouse would be located, and the framework was already in place. My task was to cover it with polycarbonate, and I set to work immediately, hoping to make it as efficient as possible. Margaret lingered nearby, tending the garden beds, occasionally bending over in very attractive poses. The sun was scorching down on us, and under the influence of the beer, my thoughts drifted dangerously far away. I tried my best to focus on my work, but not looking at my wife's mother was proving quite difficult. "Ethan, are you hungry?" I heard her voice behind me as some time passed. Turning around, I saw that Margaret had unbuttoned her robe slightly, exposing her cleavage and fanning herself with a newspaper. She looked heated and flushed from the heat, and there was something in her eyes that made me pause. "I wouldn't mind a slice," I reply, trying to keep my composure. Margaret smiled and gestured for me to go into the house where dinner was already prepared. I obediently followed her and sat down at the table while she laid out the food. The smell was inviting, and I suddenly realized how hungry I was. I thought we could take a bath later. "What do you say?" she asked. Her voice was casual, but there was an underlying tension I couldn't ignore. "I love baths." "Let me handle it myself," I offered, wanting to be helpful and perhaps extend my time there. "Oh, you've already done so much helping with the greenhouse," she said with an appreciative smile. "But if you insist, I won't refuse." Margaret set another bottle of beer on the table. "I bought it especially for you to chill," she added, lingering her gaze on my eyes a moment longer than necessary. I smiled back and opened the bottle. "Yeah, it's really hot today," I said, as I took a few sips, enjoying the cold drink that soothed my parched throat. "Okay, you eat and I'll go change," she said, and headed into the other room. I watched her disappear, the rippling of her robe leaving no chance to the imagination. The thought of following her plagued my mind, growing stronger by the second, but I couldn't muster the courage. After taking a few more sips of beer, the liquid courage began to take effect, and I finally made up my mind. I got up from the table and made my way to the room where Margaret was changing. When I entered, she was standing, completely naked, in front of the closet, her back to me. She turned around, startled, her eyes widened in surprise, and she quickly tried to cover herself with her hands. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" she asked, shock and curiosity mixed in her voice. "I came to thank you for the delicious food," I said, lowering my voice and moving closer to her, my heart pounding in my chest. "Ethan, you're my son-in-law," Margaret said, her voice trembling slightly, but her body language told me something completely different. Her hands slowly relaxed, no longer covering anything, and her eyes softened as they met mine. "A son-in-law who really appreciates you," I murmur, running my gaze over her body. Margaret hesitated for a moment. Then her posture softened, and she allowed me to move even closer. I felt the heat from her skin, and before I knew it, we were in each other's arms, and the tension that had been building up all day had finally subsided. Margaret and I ended up spending an unforgettable day together, surrendering to the attraction that had been simmering between us for so long. We knew we still had time before my wife and children arrived, and made the most of every second, savoring the forbidden thrill of our secret. Afterward, we lay together, the sun streaming through the curtains, and talked softly, sharing stories and laughter like old friends who had finally found something they had both been missing. Eventually, reality began to return. Margaret sighed and stood up, wrapping herself in her robe again, a smile playing on her lips. "We should probably get ready before they come," she said, her voice soft. I nodded, a mixture of emotions bubbling inside me: guilt, excitement, and a strange feeling of closeness to Margaret that I hadn't felt before. As I dressed and prepared to finish my work in the greenhouse, I glanced furtively at her, wondering what would happen next, knowing that this day would be etched in my memory forever.